from your employer, you automatically can buy into this. You don't have no pre-existing condition can stop you from buying in. You get covered, period. And if you notice, nobody's yet said how much it's going to cost the taxpayer. I hear this large savings. The president my friend from Vermont thinks that the employer is going to give you back if you negotiated his union all these years, got a cut in wages because you got insurance. They're going to give back that money to the employee?
Matter of fact, they will.
Well, let me tell you something. For a socialist, you got a lot more confidence in corporate America than I do.
I don't have much confidence in corporate America at all. And if I'm being honest, this clip did not age well. What Joe Biden said here, talking about union contracts, was a specific argument that several people on stage was making, saying that if a union member negotiated, or if the union negotiated a contract where they got healthcare benefits within the context of that contract, their argument is, oh, those people are going to lose those benefits. But think about what that argument means. That argument means that all across the United States, you have various people who might be in unions, a very small subset of the population that are in unions at this point, and that the rest of the population, including the millions, the tens of millions of people that don't have insurance, should somehow be slowed down or not to get insurance because the union members negotiated a contract. I think that's somewhat ludicrous. That's like saying if somebody has a really, really good job and somebody is a fry cook, increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour creates a lesser distance between the person who's doing a job that they believe that they should be getting paid $15 an hour for as opposed to that of a fry cook. And their argument becomes, well, wait a minute. If that fry cook is getting $15 an hour, I'm getting $15 an hour. It's not fair that that fry cook gets $15 an hour. They shouldn't be able to get that much. This is, in some respects, the same argument. The union negotiated a contract for a very small subset of the population that are in unions. What does that have to do with the rest of the population? Sanders' key point here is that, yeah, they'll give back those wages. Biden's key point is they won't. The argument being if they negotiated wages, that somehow, Medicare for all, those people will somehow lose out. This didn't age well. Right now, 50,000 workers for the GM auto plant are on strike. They've been on strike for the last few days. Now, it's not entirely clear why they're on strike, meaning the negotiations themselves haven't released everything that they've been fighting about, but there is one specific issue that is becoming an extremely big issue in the context of this strike with the GM. 50,000 auto workers are on strike. Those auto workers want better wages, better pay, and everything else, and those workers took a hit when GM took a hit, and they were willing, back in 2007, to negotiate a contract where they will give up some things in order to keep the company viable. Well, this company has been doing gangbusters for the last few years, and despite them wanting to invest in electrical vehicles and those type of things, the workers' argument is, why should we take a hit when you're doing well? And you've told us you're doing quite well. In order to get the protesters to knuckle under, GM has taken the strategy of getting rid of their health care, and got rid of their health care so quickly that many of the people didn't even know that GM had got rid of their health care that fast. Meaning you had people who woke up from surgery and realized that they had a $40,000 bill that the companies was no longer going to pay for because of the insurance being taken away. You also had situations with people with cancer who weren't able to get their treatment, again, because GM, on a whim, without necessarily disclosing that they were doing this on a whim, got rid of people's health care. Imagine yourself having a sick kid. Imagine yourself having a sick parent. You go to the doctor. You go to the hospital. You go for a particular surgery. You go for a particular treatment. And they check your insurance as they say, I'm sorry, Mr. So-and-so. Your insurance is no longer valid. That's literally what the company did. In order to get the GM workers to knuckle under, they cut health insurance. Now the company says, well, technically, people have COBRA and technically those payments would be paid back. But if you had a bill for $10,000, could you pay it up front? And even if you could pay, let's say, a bill for $500-600 up front, most people don't have $500 in a bank. I think it was like 60% don't have $500 in a bank. And if that is true, it is very likely that that is money that you didn't plan on and money that you can't spare. Didn't stop the auto company for trying to get these workers to knuckle under by cutting their health insurance. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content and you find yourself coming back often, please like, share, subscribe. And of course, you can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. The last debate was a snoozer, to put it mildly. That said, the conversation on Medicare for All was probably one of the best conversations that I think I've seen. Biden, in that particular conversation, and the last few debates, to be honest, didn't necessarily fare all that well with his particular healthcare plan that would leave millions uncovered, hundreds of thousands of people on the low end dying because Joe Biden's plan allows for people to go without coverage. Personally, I am pushing for Medicare for all. I'm not backing anybody that is not also pushing for Medicare for all, but I will say this. Most of the people on that stage, at the very least, feign, or at least go with this notion that we should have universal health care. Biden's plan is not. The argument that was being made was that auto workers and people who are part of unions, a very small subset of the population at this point, who negotiated to give up part wage in order to get health care, would not be on board for a Medicare for all system. Now, in order for them not to be on board for a Medicare for all system, you have to essentially make the argument that their healthcare needs matter more than everyone else in the population. And not just that, they are not losing anything. They're not losing anything. If you go for a system of Medicare for all, at this point, the negotiation that unions have with their board, just like GM is having right now, would no longer include healthcare. It is not something at that point you would have to negotiate because everybody across the board will have top tier healthcare with all of their main and basic healthcare needs covered, everything from dental and vision. Meaning, this notion of having a secondary healthcare plan kind of goes out the window. It doesn't really matter. The moment that everyone has healthcare, everyone is covered, then unions, just like they're in a negotiation now with GM, no longer need to argue that healthcare needs to be a part of the mix. Healthcare would already be a part of the mix. And those employees will at that point be able to get that money in wages as opposed to bartering those wages away for healthcare. And a secondary point to this, again, I stress this point, that a very small subset of the population is in unions. And if you're going to make the argument that we shouldn't do Medicare for all because people in unions negotiated their contract, what does this mean for the other 20, 30 million people that don't have health care? And are you really making this argument that because the union negotiated a contract, mind you, that will be up for negotiation again, where health care will be taken off the board, that we should not do Medicare for all because a small subset of the population negotiated a contract that includes health care? I think that's utterly ludicrous. That's outright ludicrous. I get that those workers for unions negotiated their health care. Fair enough. I don't know what that has to do with the rest of the population and why the rest of the population should be held up because a few people in the context of a union negotiated an amazing contract. I think union membership should be expanded. I even argue that we should have worker co-ops as a segment of the population and grow and expand that segment of the population to give workers the means of production. Beyond that point, however, I do not like this notion of healthcare being tethered to companies. And right now, with this strike at GM, this gets across my point even more so, and even Sandra's point more so. Listen to this, gentlemen. This is a person who's on strike talking about GM cutting healthcare to kids with cancer.
Company decided they were going to cut them yesterday before the union was ready to take over with our strike fund. And we've had a couple members.
And just to give a little bit of heads up on this, the union was preparing for this because they knew they were going to be up for a contract negotiation. Back in 2007, there was another contract negotiation where they were on strike for 2 days. But this one may be more protracted. The union takes over healthcare costs through COBRA, meaning the union pays their members who are on strike $250 a week, which clearly is not enough to live on, but ultimately this is just to kind of keep them somewhat without going into the brink over the course of the time for the strike. They're giving them $250 and paying for COBRA. COBRA is essentially health insurance after you leave your job. The problem here is that the company cut health insurance before the union was able to take over and did so pretty much almost immediately. And the problem with this is, of course, you have no idea how long the strike is going to last. For all they know, the strike might have lasted for 2 days, in which case all of this becomes just to make the lives of the people difficult. But even if it doesn't just take 2 days, even if it takes longer, the company tried to force, or at the very least, try to make the lives of those employees who are striking miserable by getting rid of their health care without telling them that they were doing so that quickly.
Members been sick, they couldn't get treated. We got a member with kid has cancer, went to get his treatment and couldn't get it. So we don't have 10 grand to put down and get reimbursed for. We're on strike. So they cut our benefits. They're affecting our families and kids. And this isn't a company that cares about people. This is a company that cares about the dollar.
All companies, as an absolute, care predominantly about the dollar. Your sick kid, is secondary to that process, which is part and parcel the reason why I don't want healthcare tethered to companies. You may want to leave your job. You may be fired from your job. You may get unemployment leave from the standpoint of them downsizing, or you could be on strike. Why do you want companies having this much leverage over you? Explain to me. And when arguments are being made about Medicare for all, making this point that, look, just because your taxes go up, these other expenses go away. Your copay, your going to the doctor to try to get cancer treatments, the money that you have to pay down in order to do that, the money that you have to pay to go to the ER, the money that you have to pay to get some kind of procedure or some kind of test goes away. Your payments that you make each month, the $250 or $300, depending on how much you pay for insurance, each month goes away. Instead, you pay in tax. This gets across the problem, in part, of having a company that has your healthcare, meaning you are dependent upon the company for your healthcare. They can make you knuckle under. And not just make you knuckle under. There is a valid question to be asked about whether you want your healthcare tethered to a company where you may leave or that you might get fired from. Your healthcare needs to be there constantly. It's not something that should be subject to the whims of whether or not you're working at a job or not. You should have healthcare as somewhat just as an absolute. Just as a person in a society that has the capacity to provide that healthcare, that society should indeed do that. And I understand that there's some right-wingers that don't believe this. This is my own political disposition. My point is to make the argument to people that my political disposition is correct, and that ultimately Medicare for all cuts down your bills and prevents companies from having this much influence over these aspects of your life. 50 million people a year lose their health care or get it changed, either from losing their jobs or from the jobs themselves changing health care. And again, to add one more into this, for companies that want to punish unions that are going on strike for better wages and better benefits. Put yourself in the position for the moment. You're getting $250 a week because your company goes on strike. You believe your company is taking advantage of you. GM needed to be bailed out by us, the taxpayers. On top of that, the employees were willing to take a haircut because the company wasn't doing all that well. Now that the company is doing record profits, their point is, how are you expecting us to essentially give more when you are doing magnificently well? Part of the issue, and like I said, we can't necessarily know everything, is healthcare. Right now, they pay about 3%, meaning the companies. The union has negotiated for the employees to essentially pay 3% of their healthcare. The company wants to increase this to 15%. Think about what that means. This was outright rejected by the union, as it should be outright rejected by the union. This is a cut in wages. If they're expected to pay 15% for healthcare, that means that they're, going to see a dramatic drop in their wages by the tune of 12%, whatever they negotiate. When Biden is on stage saying, you believe that those companies are going to give that money back, Sanders didn't say they would give it back willingly. He just said they'd give it back. And I would argue that this very specific issue, from the standpoint of unions trying to negotiate and trying to get better benefits, better wages, and the company not wanting to provide those things, and uses healthcare to try to make the employees knuckle under, including employees that had kids with cancer that were shocked to find out that their insurance was no longer valid. You go to the doctor's office. And when you go to the doctor's office, you're going because your kid needs to get a chemotherapy treatment. And as you go to the building, as you go to the outpatient procedure hall, the woman, very pleasant, how are you today? You say, I am doing well today. Your kid is right there. They're puttering about. They have no hair because they have cancer and they have been getting chemotherapy treatments before. And yet, they're still in a pleasant disposition. The woman says, okay, I need your insurance cards. You say, here you are. You give the woman your insurance cards. And the woman says, hey, it looks like this insurance is not valid. Do you have another insurance, or has your insurance changed? And you say, well, my insurance was valid the other day. I mean, my kid needs to get treatment. My kids needs to get this chemotherapy to deal with their cancer. The company comes out and says, look, if they have Cobra will reimburse them for whatever they got. So technically, there was no gap in their coverage. Well, this is not a technically issue. There was a gap in their coverage, and the notion that somebody could pay $10,000 for a cancer treatment and get reimbursed is utter nonsense. Again, most people don't have $500 in the bank. And even if they did have the money in the bank, are they in a position where they could put that money out for an unspecified period of time with the notion that they may get it back at some later date? I would argue they cannot. This is deplorable. We bailed you out. We bailed you out. Talking about GM, we bailed them out. And this is what they're doing to the auto workers. 50,000 on strike for better wages at a company that is doing gangbusters in regards to their profitability. And yet you have this man having to come out, doing an interview, saying that we have kids with cancer that can't get their medical treatments because GM cut their health care on the second day of the strike.
Supposed to have our benefits to the end of the month. Company decided they were going to cut them yesterday before the union was ready to take over with our strike fund. And we've had a couple members been sick. They couldn't get treated. We got a member with kid has cancer, went to get his treatment and couldn't get it. So we don't have 10 grand to put down and get reimbursed for. We're on strike. So they cut our benefits. They're affecting our families and kids. And this isn't a company that cares about people. This is a company that cares about the dollar. And there's another example right there. They don't care about this kid with cancer and his treatment. They just want us to pay for it.
Medicare for all. Under Medicare for all, GM would not be able to use the kid's cancer as a club to try to force capitulation into a deal that's potentially exploitive of the workers. And this, under a Medicare for all system, doesn't happen. Those workers, those employees right here, who are fighting on the picket lines all across the United States, one less thing will be up for negotiation, meaning their health care. This should never take place. As an absolute, this should never take place. Like, share, subscribe. And if, needless to be said, solidarity to the workers on that picket line. Thanks so.